bum 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 ba-rum bum 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 ba-dum bum 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 ba-da-da-dum bum bum ba-dum ba-ba-dum bum 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 ba-dum bum 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 ba-da-da-dum bum bum ba-dum ba-ba-dum. I love watching the screens and seeing everybody coming in from Yorktown, Virginia, and Toronto, and hello everyone, so nice Kansas. It's great to see you all, my friends. It's Monday night, and I love Monday nights because here you are, here I am. We're all together, and we are doing one thing and one thing only, and that is we are talking about homeopathy. And I'm going to teach you what I know, and I want to teach you in a way that you will be able to know for when it's necessary in your family, for your homestead, for your friends, for your clients, your patients. So my name is Joette Calabrese, and we do this every Monday night. For those of you who are new, this is where we go. And for those of you who already know me, my friends, welcome. It's great to see you from Mighties and YouTube and Facebook and Instagram, Pinterest. We're all over the place. It's really great. We are reaching many hundreds of thousands of people. We've not reached a million, but we're quite watched. Facebook is 70,000. I think I see here. Instagram was the last time we looked was about 35,000. Pinterest was, this was quite a while ago. Actually, it was about a month ago. Pinterest was, we had 40,000, and then we have YouTube, Rumble, Facebook. It's really, and then of course, Joette's Mighty members, and I love seeing you all here. Hello from Rockford, Michigan. I really just like to say hello to you all and wait till more people hop in. Hi, Tara from Western Australia. It's also good to see you. And we're going to talk about epistaxis, bloody nose. That's our subject tonight, bloody nose. And so you would think that this is such a simple concept. I mean, such a simple, bloody nose, what could it be? Only one medicine, right? No, it's a little different than that. There are a lot of medicines that could be quite valuable. We're going to try to, I'm going to do my best to shave it down for you in as easy a format as possible. So the first one that we think of, and I want you to think of, when there's a bloody nose from an injury. What do you mean by an injury? Well, somebody ducks down, goes to pick up something off the floor, they hit their head or they hit their nose on the coffee table, and they get a bloody nose. Or they blow their nose so frequently that it's kind of an injury of sorts. That kind of bloody nose, being that it's from an injury of sorts, could even be from coughing too much, and from a cold or a cough. Coughing too much causes a bloody nose. And I know that it looks dramatic, but my friends, epistaxis and bloody nose is very rarely something that we have to be very concerned about. Now, we're also going to talk about profuse bleeding as well. And we're going to do what we can to avoid people from having to go to the ER to get their nose packed and get drugs, etc. So the first medicine that we think of is, let's see if you folks know. I know you know. Anytime we have an injury and there's blood involved, even if there is no blood involved, even if, let's say if it's hematoma and it's under the skin. That's not what we're talking about here. We're seeing actual blood flowing. We are going to see a specific medicine that you all know. In fact, it was probably the first medicine you ever learned. Arnica. Thank you very much. You've got it, Cassandra. Arnica, well, you also phosphorus too. But when it's an injury, we're going to talk about arnica first because it is such a great medicine, not just for injury, ailments from an injury, but also arnica is one of our great medicines for bleeding. It's a great medicine to correct the blood as well. So what do I mean by that? Well, I've written an article, should you be interested, called My Dad and the Dead Cardiologists, and it's particularly interesting regarding how I used arnica for my father for his cardiac conditions. So you might want to look that up. It was quite a while ago that I wrote that article. You should be able to find it rather easily. I authored a column in Wise Traditions many years ago, and it was one of the articles that was posted, that was published. So My Dad and the Dead Cardiologist, take a look at that. It's not about bloody nose. It's about how to use arnica for vascular and cardiac issues. So if someone gets a bloody nose from an injury, and it doesn't even have to be a grand injury. It could be something they just tap it and it bleeds. If that happens, then we know the medicine is arnica montana. Now, if it's at that moment, the first time ever, they've never had anything like this before, and the bleeding is abated, and it's, they use the pressure point up here, and they squeeze it, and then they hold a tissue there, and etc. And it's going away. I don't know that you even want to bother using arnica. But if it happens time and time again, then indeed that is something that you want to take probably on a regular basis. And yeah, I get a bloody nose when I sneeze through one nostril only here in Florida. Yes, sneezing is an injury. I would start with that. It doesn't mean that you're not allergic to something that's going on in Florida. It might be mold indeed. But if a sneeze, which is a little bit of a violent act, and then there's a bloody nose that follows that, by all means, I would think of arnica. And I might use arnica in a low potency, a 30C. If it's a severe injury, like a true accident where there's an automobile accident, then by all means I would use a 200C. And I would use it frequently. If it's bleeding profusely, absolutely we're going to use arnica much more frequently. And someone said just a minute ago, where did she go? She said phosphorus, and she's absolutely right. That's Cassandra. Phosphorus is when the bleeding is bright red and we can't stop it, or it appears as though it's going to go on for a very long time. That's when we use phosphorus, and I love phosphorus in a 200C. So let's say it's an injury. They get hit in the face that starts to bleed, and now the pain is abated because arnica is going to abate the pain as well. Now they can also employ phosphorus 200C and utilize that. If it's very severe, it could be every 15 minutes for 1 hour. If it's not so severe, then maybe, one dose 15 minutes later, then a second dose. That's the second dose. The third dose, maybe 40 minutes, an hour later, something like that. You're always looking for that tipping point, my friends. You're looking for the place where you're going to meet the condition. In other words, the intensity of the condition with the frequency of the medicine. We're going to meet those together. And if the person shifts and it's no longer as intense, then you are going to shift. You're going to mirror what's going on with this person. In other words, if it's not so intense, the bleeding is not so intense, you should not be administering the medicine that frequently. You have to adjust. You have to pivot. Okay? Yes, thank you, Pat. You're right. The best arnica, and your dad outlived the cardiologist. My father did. He outlived all of the cardiologists, and I might say, my friends, they were all younger than he was, considerably. Some of them 20, 25 years younger than he was, and they suffered. They all passed away. My father lived into his 90s. Yes, I used this article to help my dad. Thank you. You're very welcome. Now, my friends, we don't use these medicines forever. We use them until we see a shift. So I want you to always that's what I'm talking about. As the change occurs, then you represent that for them in the medicine. How long it's used, how frequently, etc. Okay? Yes, we've had phosphorus stop a bloody nose instantly. It's quite amazing. Yes, it can be quite amazing. Absolutely. So phosphorus is a bloody nose that is bright red blood, often profuse, and it can also start in the middle of the night. And it can be as a result of anything. We don't really need to know what the etiology is, what the cause is. We don't always need to know those things, my friends. If we know the true cause, it was an injury, hence a bloody nose, then that's useful. So that can be very helpful. Now let's talk about a different kind of bloody nose, and that's with children. Children are a little more prone, the elderly and the young are a little more prone to bloody nose, and children often wake up with them. And if a child is constantly got their fingers in their nose, or maybe it's not constant, maybe it's frequent enough, and you're suspicious that they may have worms, pinworms, thread worms, so, worms that children often get because their fingers are at their nose, and there is an association between the itching, the rectal itching of pinworms / thread worms, and the itching of the nose, itching in both ends. And if children start to get a bloody nose, and you're suspicious of that, Cinna is our medicine. C-I-N-A, Cinna. Not China. There's no H in there. It's Cinna, C-I-N-A, and I like it in a 6. And we use that twice daily, every day for at least 2 months. If there is indeed a history of or likelihood that the child has parasites. Now, we also want to think about a bloody nose when we see someone, again, the young and the elderly, when they are pale. As though maybe they have anemia. Maybe the gums are pale. You lift up the lip and look to see if the gums are pale. You look at the eyes and look to see if the rim of the eyelid is, the conjunctiva is pale. If you see that kind of paleness and the person is perhaps weak, and even if they're feverish, they don't need to be, but if you see that, now we're thinking, and they get a bloody nose, now I think of the medicine Ferrum phosphoricum, otherwise known as Ferrum phos or Fairphos. Ferrum phosphoricum, and I love that medicine in a 6X, sometimes a 6C if that's all you can find. And I like that 2 to 3 times a day until you see that the person is no longer weak. It could be it could be days, weeks, and even months. And we're going to see a shift in their energy. You're going to look at the eyes to see if the conjunctiva have darkened and gotten pinker. And how do you know if that's the right color? Is that pale, you ask yourself? I can't tell if that person has pale gums or pale conjunctiva in the eyes. Well, compare that person to other people in your family. Look at everyone's eyes. Pull the lids down and look into everyone's eyes and compare the color. And if one member of your family who's getting a bloody nose from time to time or even very frequently, they have that characteristic that's different than every other member of the family, you know it's Ferrum phosphoricum or Fairphos 6X twice daily. If it's quite severe, and what I mean by that is if the child or the elderly person is, or it could be any age, but generally it's the young and the elderly, and you see that they are, they really need this. In other words, they look downright anemic. I would go with Ferrum phos 3 times a day. And then as they improve, what do? We back off. We don't use these medicines forever, my friends. These are medicines. They are not supplements. They are not vitamins. This is not something we take willy-nilly. It has to be really pretty darned specific, okay? Potency, I use Cinna in a 6 twice a day for at least 2 months. Actually, it's more like if there are pinworms, my friends, or any parasite, you want to go probably closer to 3 months because the cycle of these parasites, especially pinworms, which are really common in children, super common, is about 28 days, but then we have to go into another 28 days for the eggs that hatch. I know it sounds disgusting, but hey, once you're a mother and you see these kinds of things, it doesn't faze you any longer after a while. So I like to go as long as 3 months, up to 3 months. Yes. All righty. Now I want to show you something. I'm going to show you my repertory, which is, let's see if I can find the right page here. The repertory that is, I want to show you the nose, bleeding. Yes, here it is. Okay. This is, as I like to show you this, we have so many medicines from which to choose for epistaxis. That's why I think it's so important that you know how to do this without having to go this far. Although, if you really have a curious mind, you might want to get this book or at least take my courses. And the way you take my courses, you go to Joette's Learning Center and scroll down and join one of the study groups of the courses. But this is now the Meta Repertory, 4th edition by Robin Murphy. And here on page 1664, you will see all of these medicines. See that whole list there? You see that whole list? These are just medicines. Those are not sentences. That's just a list of all the homeopathic medicines that can be of use in treating epistaxis. But then it's broken down further. And that's where the gold is, my friends. Let me fix this so I can read this more readily. That's where the gold lies. Because you want to break it down further. For example, on blowing the nose. We know on blowing the nose or on sneezing, we're going to use arnica. Arnica is one of our main medicines here. There are others, but I want to teach you the fundamentals first, and then we can always build, or you can build on that foundational knowledge. But what if it's a chronic problem? This person has got a bloody nose on a regular basis. That's chronic. Doesn't have to be every day, but it could be, 3 times a day or 3 times a week that we see this person on and on, week after week, perhaps month after month. Now we're going to consider the medicine phosphorus. Phosphorus. Again, and I like to use it in a 200C, and for a chronic condition, I would use it every other day, 1 dose every other day, until we see a big shift and we see that it's one of 3 magic markers we want to see before we assess, or when we assess whether or not the medicine is acting. The first magic marker is that it's less intense. So there's less blood, less intensity to the symptoms. The second magic marker is that it's lasting for a shorter period of time. So instead of the bloody nose lasting for 2 hours, for example, it's lasting 10 minutes. And the third magic marker is a larger space between each episode. So instead of it happening every other day or every third day, now it's happening once a week. If we see any one of those 3 magic markers after we've applied the medicine, used the medicine, then we know that we're on to the right medicine, and we carry on until we take it to completion. Once complete, my friends, you don't continue with the medicine. You stop. We halt. We halt the use because, again, it's medicine, not vitamins, not supplements. This is a whole different paradigm. For those of you who are new, I want you to understand that. But if the bloody nose starts to come back again, they start getting this epistaxis once again, say 2 months later after you've stopped, what do? I don't want you to say, oh no, it's back again. Instead, I want you to see the benefit that you've gained, and you're going to reapply that. Not application in terms of using it on the face, but reapply the method. And that is back to phosphorus 200C in the same fashion you used it before because it acted before, and take it up again and start it again. Until when? Until you see that the epistaxis events have again halted. And over a period of time, as you use these medicines, you will see uproot, going deeper and deeper and deeper until you finally get to the point where perhaps the person doesn't even have that condition any longer. And that's exactly what we are looking for. Okay. So I also want to point out, I think I said coughing, sneezing, hitting the nose, that's all arnica. I want to make sure that I'm including the coughing as well. Now let's say, I know somebody's going to be asking about anosmia, which is the loss or the distortion of smell and taste, because the co-people, and you know who I'm talking about, who are obsessed with that 3-4 years ago, commandeered that condition and said, oh, this is related to this condition, and that's how you know you've got it. But my friends, this book was compiled over 220 years, and we've known about that condition related to sinuses, colds, flus, etc. for a very long time. So in other words, that co-issue is not about, does not have its own little conditions. You know, they get something that's a kerfuffle and they make it into a snafu and then it turns into a conundrum and then they end up with exactly what we ended up with in the last 3 to 4 years, a quagmire. It's the way I see it anyway. So, someone's asking, Christina says, would you ever use phosphorus 1M? Yes, I would, but it would have to be pretty intense. I'm not going to teach it from that position because I don't know who I'm teaching to, but if you have an understanding of homeopathy and you've used phosphorus in a 1M, then indeed it could be a very useful way of addressing especially a constant bloody nose. Not frequently. We're going to use it infrequently, perhaps once a day or once every 3 days at the onset. What about altitude and a nosebleed? Yes. Altitude is, you know what? I don't know that off the top of my head. Let me see if I can find that. Altitude for nosebleed. My sense is that one of the best medicines for that is going to be either carbovegetablus, because it's a very specific medicine for altitude sickness in general. And it is carbovegetablus can also be used for when there is anything to do with the breathing, the sinuses, and respiratory. So I have not looked it up. Maybe someone else wants to look it up here because I don't know it off the top of my head. All righty. Snafu, I know. Conundrum. Let's see if I've got some more questions here. Good questions, my friends. Let's see what we've got here. Yes, arnica, even from blowing your nose too hard. Yes, because it's an injury of sorts, even though we know that that's not within the range of normal, but that's acceptable. We can still use it just because it's not within the range of normal. Wow, I suddenly get nosebleed when I sneeze through one nostril only. Yeah, I already talked about that. Okay. What about profuse nosebleeds from thinning membranes in the 70s? Goes on 2 hours. I already talked about it. That's absolutely so. Here's my thinking, Deb. I want you to know about this. Your question is, what about profuse nosebleeds from thinning membranes in the 70s? Forget the thinning membranes. It is what it is. Profuse nosebleeds that go on for 2 hours. We've already talked about it. That's where I want you to go with this. So don't worry about the fact that somebody diagnosed and said, well, the reason is because you have thinning membranes. Regardless. I tried phosphorus 200 for frequent nosebleeds from lightly blowing my nose, bright red, heavy, and hard to stop with no response. I'll try arnica next time. Yes, ma'am. Yes, absolutely. Took it every 10 minutes, too. Okay, arnica 30 or 200, injury. Okay, we got all this. Thank you. Cinna. All right, now let's talk about China. I talked about Cinna, but China is just the way the country is spelled, China. China is for when the person is weakened by a bloody nose. In other words, the potential for a bloody nose is frequent enough that there's enough blood loss now that the person is getting anemic. So it's very similar. We can even use them simultaneously, similar to ferrum phos. But China is a true loss of fluids. I'm not talking about a bloody nose that lasts, an hour or half an hour once every 6 months. But when we see something where the blood is pouring out, it's dripping, it's constant, and it's happening time and time again, and now the person is getting a little bit on the anemic side. We don't need to know absolutely whether or not it is anemia, but it is indeed a fatigue that occurs as a result of that or around that time. That's when we use China 200C. And we can use that twice a day. It only needs to be used probably a few days. often. Yep. And a genetic anomaly. I am not going to try to pronounce that, but it's hereditary hemorrhagic telangiectasia, passed down from parent to child. Who cares? Alexia, let me just tell you, allergies are passed down. Short stature is passed down. Hair loss is passed down. The moment the sperm finds the egg, that's when everything is passed through. I would not use that as, because what that is, when we say that it's something is hereditary, and you may already know this, Alexia, but when they say it's genetic, it leads us to believe that there's nothing we can do about it, and that couldn't be further from the truth. Whole families have gut issues. Whole families have arthritis. Whole families, everything is genetic when you think about it. And it's only when we use something from the exterior, extrinsic, coming into the body, that can make it worse. So it then becomes kind of epigenetic, so to speak. We're going to use the medicine that we would use regardless of whether or not it has been determined that it's genetic, my friends. And so that's what I want you to be thinking about. Because if we thought that genetics kept us from being able to treat homeopathically, and I don't think that's exactly what you're saying, but that it separates us, it only means that that person has gone quite far in getting tested. And I have to say that the more we get tested, the more they will find. So, I am not a proponent of a lot of testing. I believe very strongly that we need to stay away from most testing unless they're absolutely necessary. Because once they put that in our brain that this is, you have no recourse because it's in your DNA. So, well, I guess you might as well just give up on that. No, now what we use is the bleeding, the hemorrhagic, hereditary hemorrhagic bleeding is something that is, if it's profuse, we're going to use phosphorus. If it starts as a result of, even though it's apparently genetic, if we follow that train of thought, and someone hits their nose with this condition and it starts to bleed, we're not going to matter. It's not going to matter to us whether or not it's genetic. It's simply going to be arnica. If it's profuse, it's going to be phosphorus. If it causes an anemic state of sorts, it's going to be ferrum phos and china. You see where we're going with this? Okay. Could it be to dryness or allergies? Yes, ma'am, it can be. And so what we do is we look at how it's presenting, okay? Not that it's from allergies, but how it's presenting. It presents as bright red, or the middle of the night, or upon sneezing, etc., etc. And then we can also treat the allergic constitution. And how do we do that? We go to Joette's Learning Center, scroll down, and go to the course called Allergic, where I break it down as to exactly the medicines that should be used, so we use both. Both the medicine that is to address the allergic state, as well as the medicine as to how it's presenting with a bloody nose on a regular basis. Yeah, it's good. Seems like more people than usual are getting bloody nose than the past month. Allergies, yes, it's certainly allergies. Absolutely. It could also be a barometric pressure shift. It could also be bad smells. It could be living in a house with mold. It could be et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So Carboveg, I would use it a 30 or 200. Do you go for diagnosis? Is it okay not for the exam? I'm not sure I understand. Well, do you need a diagnosis to tell you that you have a bloody nose? That is the diagnosis. Now, if you've got a lump in the axillary area and You know that it's not because you've eaten chocolate, or it's not because you've had some kind of bacterial infection, or you don't know what it is, and you've been to someone, good chiropractor, perhaps your whoever your healthcare provider is, and they palpate it, and they say, we don't know what this is. I don't know. You really want someone, though, who has got, excuse me for saying, gray hair, that's been around a long time and has seen this so many times that they know automatically what it is. But if you don't have that, and you must find out what it is, now we go for the diagnosis. Stay away from tests, my friends, unless they are necessary, because I guarantee it will put you in a state that will keep you coming back for more tests. The more that is tested, the more that will be found, because there's no such thing as a body that's perfect. Just like when we look at our skin and we see a little bump or discoloration, it's the same thing inside, my friends. It's the same thing. And once it's dug about and it's seen through this lens or that lens, or with this camera or with this sonogram or this x-ray, etc., even heat tests, my friends, be very careful, because you're now setting yourself up for going down the road of one test after another, and it will all be fueled by one very important emotion: fear. That's what I want you to not have. That's the whole idea here. Because when you're fearful, you will go for tests. When you are fearful, you will do whatever you're told to do, as evidenced by the last few years. When you are fearful, you will do whatever the authorities tell you to do. And I want you to have the ability to make a lot of decisions on your own. I'm not telling you should never go for a test. I'm telling you, cut back on those tests. The pap smears, the mammograms, the colonoscopies, just because you're a certain age, I'm telling you, I've never had any of those. So, my friends, no, pap smears when I was a young woman, because I didn't know any better. My friend was young and had some colon cancer after bleeding. If there is bleeding out the rectum. If there's bleeding at the rectum, my friends, of course that's when you go for a test. That's not normal unless it's a hemorrhoid. But if you know it's not a hemorrhoid and there's rectal bleeding, my goodness, yes. Now you go for the test. You see how I'm separating the two? But we don't go for a colonoscopy just to have a look-see. We use that for when something might be awry. Yes. Altitude. Oh, I took a guess on it. Meta-repertory, says Francia. Carbo-veg is high, like you said, Joe, at altitude sickness. Carbo-veg is 3 points, altitude sickness. Yes, thank you very much. Yes, thank you for checking. Yeah, it makes sense. Carbo-vegetabilis has to do with altitude. Okay. I think we have just completed our evening. So many good questions and good points. And thank you for allowing me to springboard off of your comments and your questions, because it allows me to teach more in greater depth. So my friends, if you're not in a study group, do join. Go to Joette's Learning Center and learn how to scroll down, and actually it's on the front page. Gateway to Homeopathy, join a group. If you don't know who to join with, call Eileen at my office. She's great, and she'll set you up in a group. Thanks, my friends. God bless you all, and I will see you next week. Bye now.
With our homeopathic protocols, you learn your remedies. My family needs me, so I must know our remedies. How much to take, how often to treat, and when to stop, and when to repeat. With our homeopathic protocols, you learn your remedies. Athusa, no dairy, it's elementary. With arnica head, arsenicum fed, spigelia slither, orms from wither, no more. My family needs me, so I improve my memory. Not only the rems, but how often to treat, and when to stop, and when to repeat. With your homeopathic protocols, learn your remedies. Bella so red and arnica hedgerow, Sarah bark, Ignatia dark, Sora so frigid and Coopum to rigid, and crude itches, Cali Caponicum, let it melt on your gumbo, Vista wheat are some great ways to treat ya. La 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 la, homeopathic protocols, learn your remedies.